Have you ever wondered when exactly life became something you had to survive instead of something you could simply live? You didn't always feel this way. Tired, tense, constantly chasing after something that slips through your fingers the moment you think you've caught it. There was a time, perhaps, in your early years when life felt more natural. You woke up without the weight of 100 expectations. You laughed without needing a reason. You tried new things without fearing failure. There was no need to control every outcome because you trusted life instinctively. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. You were told that growing up meant getting serious, that success required constant effort, that only those who grind endlessly get anywhere. And so little by little, you started forcing yourself into routines, into relationships, into roles that never quite felt like you. You began to trade peace for performance presence, for productivity. Now you wake up tired before the day even begins. You fill your calendar but feel empty inside. You plan every move but still feel lost. And the hardest part, you've been trained to believe that if you're suffering, it's because you're not doing enough. But what if that's the lie? What if the real problem isn't that you're not trying hard enough, but that you're trying too hard to control something that was never meant to be forced? When did tiredness become your baseline? Not just the kind that sleep can fix, but the deep soul-level fatigue you carry even in moments of silence. It likely started subtly. At first, you were just busy schoolwork plans, dreams. You told yourself it was temporary. You thought once I reach that next goal, things will slow down. But they never did. The pace only quickened. Responsibilities piled up. Expectations, some from others, most from yourself, began to stack like weights on your shoulders. You didn't question it. You just kept going, because that's what you were taught to do. Over time, your body began to whisper, a tension in the neck, headaches that came more often, that heavy feeling in your chest on Sunday nights. But you brushed it off, took another coffee, pushed through. After all, rest is for the weak, right? Then the whispers turned into shouts. You found yourself snapping at people you love, forgetting why you walked into a room, struggling to sleep, even when you were exhausted. And still you blamed yourself. I need to manage my time better, you told yourself. I need to be more disciplined, more positive, more grateful. What you didn't realize is that you were caught in a silent war, not against the world, but against your own natural rhythm. You had learned to override your instincts, to suppress your exhaustion, to ignore your intuition. You thought you were being strong, but in truth, you were slowly disconnecting from yourself. The most dangerous part, this exhaustion isn't loud. It doesn't collapse you in one dramatic moment. It's quiet, creeping. It disguises itself as normal. You stop remembering what it felt like to feel light, to feel rested, to feel alive. And that's exactly what modern life has normalized, a constant state of inner depletion. We've mistaken productivity for worth pressure, for purpose, and noise for progress. We run faster, but we don't know where we're going. We fill every second and still feel empty. So I ask you again, when did tiredness become your baseline? Because the truth is, you're not weak. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're just human, trying to live in a world that forgot how to breathe. How much of your life has been shaped by the belief that if you just tried hard enough, you could control everything? Since childhood, you've been fed a silent doctrine. If you want something badly enough and you work hard enough, it will happen. It's a comforting idea, one that gives the illusion of certainty in an uncertain world. So like most people, you embraced it. You built plans, routines, backup plans. You visualized your goals. You fought through discomfort. You said no to rest. You took pride in pushing through pain. Because effort you believed was always noble and control was always possible. But what no one told you was that life doesn't always respond to effort. You can do everything right and still lose the job. Still lose the person, still lose yourself. You can follow the rules and still find yourself standing in the ruins of something you never thought would break. And in those moments when your plans crumble despite your best intentions, you don't just feel pain, you feel betrayal, as if life owes you something for all the ways you tried to manage it. So what do? You double down, you tighten your grip, you try to plan more, do more, fix more. You start to micromanage the uncontrollable, your emotions, other people's reactions, the timing of things that were never yours to direct. You trade your peace for performance, your presence for prediction, And you live in a state of quiet panic, terrified that if you ever stop trying, everything will fall apart. But here's the truth: most of us never learn until we're forced to. Control is an illusion. You were never in charge of the timing. You were never meant to carry the full weight of every outcome. You were meant to participate, to co-create, to respond, but not to dominate. Trying to control life is like trying to catch the wind in your hands. You end up exhausted, empty, disoriented. And yet we've been taught that surrender is weakness, that to let go is to give up. But surrender is not passive. It is the most courageous thing a person can do, because it requires you to stop pretending, to finally admit that you are not the center of the universe, and that's okay. There's a strange kind of freedom in that moment. When you stop trying to force things, you begin to see clearly. You realize that life isn't asking you to be in control, it's asking you to be present, to trust the flow, not to engineer it. And slowly something begins to shift. The anxiety softens, the heart opens, the tension releases. So ask yourself honestly, what are you clinging to right now that you were never meant to control? And what might happen if you loosen your grip just enough to let life breathe? What if the most powerful thing you could do right now is to stop trying so hard? That question may sound strange in a culture obsessed with effort. We live in a world that celebrates hustle, glorifies grind, and treats rest as something to be earned. We're taught that the only way to move forward is by pushing harder, faster, more. But in the midst of all this striving, there's a forgotten wisdom quietly whispering through the noise: Wu Wei. Wu Wei is an ancient Taoist concept often misunderstood. Translated loosely, it means non-doing or effortless action. But don't mistake it for laziness or passivity. It is in fact one of the deepest expressions of intelligence and courage. It's not about doing nothing, it's about doing only what is in alignment with the natural flow of things. It's the art of moving with life, not against it. Imagine a dancer not rigidly counting steps, but letting the music move through her. Or a surfer who doesn't fight the wave, but reads it, feels it, and rides it. That's Wu Wei. It's not resistance, it's attunement. It's presence. It's knowing when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to be still, when to let go and when to lean in. Alan Watts, one of the most eloquent voices to bring Eastern philosophy to the West, described Wu Wei not as inaction, but as action that does not involve struggle. He reminded us that the most meaningful movements in nature happen without force. Trees grow, rivers flow, seasons change, all without stress or urgency. But we've been conditioned to believe that if we're not struggling, we're not trying hard enough, that ease is suspicious, that effort is virtue. And so we override our bodies, ignore our intuition, and drown out our inner voice, all in the name of progress. The result: exhaustion without meaning, motion without direction. Wu Wei invites us to live differently. It invites us to listen, to slow down, to move with intention instead of compulsion. It asks us to trust that sometimes the best thing we can do is not to intervene, that the solution will rise not through force, but through space, clarity, and presence. This is not easy. In fact, letting go of struggle can be harder than struggling itself. It takes humility to admit we're not in control. It takes courage to wait when everything inside us screams to act. But in those moments of surrender, something sacred happens. We stop chasing and life starts showing up. So ask yourself, what would it look like to move through today with less resistance? What if you trusted the wave instead of trying to command the ocean? Because Wu Wei isn't about giving up. It's about waking up to the rhythm that has always been there, waiting for you to hear it. Have you ever noticed how the most profound truths can't be explained, but only felt? Taoism was never meant to be a system of rules. It wasn't created to give you a 10-step plan for happiness or a motivational slogan to hang on your wall. It began as something much simpler and infinitely deeper. A quiet observation of life, a reverence for the natural rhythms that govern the world without force, the changing seasons, the way water always finds its path, the silent intelligence behind growth, decay, birth, and renewal. The word Tao literally means the way, not a way out, but the way things move. It describes the invisible current that flows through all things. The more you try to define it, the further you drift from its essence. Lao Tzu, the ancient sage behind the Tao Te Ching, put it best: the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. Why? Because truth, once trapped in language, becomes static, and the Tao is alive. It moves, breathes, shifts. Taoism invites us to stop grasping for control and instead learn to move with life, not as a concept, but as a felt experience. And when this ancient philosophy crossed paths with Buddhism in ancient China, it gave birth to something even more radical: Zen. Zen doesn't ask you to believe in anything. It doesn't offer doctrines or dogmas. It simply asks you to be here now, completely present, not in your thoughts, not in your stories about who you should be or where you should go, but in your breath, in your body, in this very moment. It is the practice of shedding everything that gets in the way of direct experience. Together, Taoism and Zen speak a language that our modern world desperately needs but struggles to hear. They remind us that you are not in control, and that's not a failure. It's a truth. You were never meant to force the river to change its course. You were meant to learn its rhythm and flow with it. This wisdom is hard for the Western mind to accept. We've been raised to idolize logic, certainty, and results. But Taoism and Zen point to something beneath all that, a kind of knowing that doesn't live in the head, but in the heart, in the gut, in the quiet space beyond words. They offer not an escape from life, but a reconciliation with it. So ask yourself, not with your mind, but with your soul, what would it feel like to stop resisting the moment you're in? What might you hear if you stopped talking over life's whisper? Maybe the wisdom you've been searching for isn't in the next book, podcast, or plan. Maybe it's already here. What happens when an ancient wisdom meets a restless modern world and someone finally knows how to translate between the two? In the middle of the 20th century, America was growing fast. Industry was booming. Productivity was king. Science and logic reigned supreme. But beneath the surface of achievement, something subtle and profoundly human was being lost. People were beginning to feel disconnected, anxious, spiritually hollow. The noise was increasing, but meaning was slipping away. It was in this cultural climate that Alan Watts emerged, not as a guru, not as a missionary, but as a kind of philosophical bridge. He didn't try to convert people. He didn't preach from mountaintops. He simply invited the West to remember something the East had never forgotten, that life is not a machine to control, but a dance to join. Watts had a rare gift. He could take abstract ancient Eastern philosophies, Taoism, Zen, Vedanta, and breathe them into life through language that Western minds could actually feel. He didn't just explain ideas, he embodied them. He spoke with the rhythm of someone who wasn't rushing toward a point. He paused. He laughed. He told stories. He let truth land in the spaces between his words. And most of all, he challenged everything the Western world had been conditioned to believe. He asked, what if effort is not always a virtue? What if control is an illusion? What if meaning isn't something you build, but something you notice once you stop trying so hard to create it? For many, his words felt like a breath of fresh air in a room that had been sealed shut for decades. Here was someone who wasn't telling them to do more, but to be more aware. Someone who didn't say fix yourself, but instead asked, what if you're already whole? Alan Watts didn't promise certainty. In fact, he celebrated mystery. He knew that the human mind, especially the Western mind, would try to turn even the Tao into a technique, even Zen into a task. But he refused to let wisdom be reduced to formulas. Instead, he taught that the path to truth is not through control, but through surrender, through wonder, through presence. His metaphors were unforgettable. Life is not a journey to a destination, it's like music. The goal is not to reach the final note, but to enjoy every beat along the way. Watts reminded us that the Tao cannot be forced, that Wu-Wei isn't laziness, it's the quiet courage to trust what is. He gave language to the ache we couldn't name, and then pointed us inward, not toward answers, but toward attention. Even now, decades after his death, Alan Watts' voice still echoes. Not because he shouted, but because he listened first. Not because he told us who to be, but because he helped us unlearn everything we were never meant to carry. And maybe that's why his words still resonate, because deep down we're all just looking for someone who reminds us that we don't have to fight so hard, that it's safe to breathe, to pause, to be. Imagine a vast, powerful river, a force of nature that flows endlessly forward, carrying all things in its path. Now imagine someone trapped in its current, flailing their arms, trying desperately to swim upstream. What do you think will happen? That's exactly how Alan Watts described the modern human condition. We are the ones swimming against the current, believing that with enough effort, force, or willpower, we can change the direction of life itself. We fight the natural movement of events, resist change, grieve over what's already passed, and fear what hasn't yet come. And we do this not because we're weak, but because we've been taught to believe that struggle equals strength. But the truth is more difficult and more liberating than that. Watts explained that suffering rarely comes from the circumstances themselves. Most of the time, our deepest pain arises from resistance, our refusal to accept what is. We lose a job, and instead of grieving and flowing forward, we cling to what's already gone. A relationship ends, and instead of making space for healing, we obsess over what could have been. A plan falls apart, and we label ourselves a failure instead of letting life show us a new way. We try to hold on to water, but the tighter we grip, the more it slips through our fingers. The river is not our enemy. It never was. It has its own wisdom, its own rhythm, its own timing. It knows where it's going, even when we don't. But we've been so conditioned to believe that control is the only path to peace that we've forgotten a fundamental truth. Life flows best when we don't fight it. When we resist reality, tension builds physically in our bodies, mentally in our thoughts, spiritually in our being. We become anxious, restless, frustrated. And the cruelest part is that deep down, we often know we're sinking. But the fear of letting go, of surrendering, feels even scarier than the suffering itself. Watts invites us to reconsider that fear. What if letting go doesn't mean giving up? What if it's the moment we stop fighting the current that we finally begin to float? To trust the river is not to be passive. It is to be wise. It means learning to read the currents of life, to sense when to act and when to wait, to know when to row and when to rest. Like a skilled sailor adjusting the sails instead of cursing the wind. Suffering is not a punishment. It's a signal, a call to realign with what is not what we wish was. And when we finally stop swimming upstream, when we allow the river to carry us, we may find that it's taking us exactly where we were meant to go all along. Not through control, but through trust, through surrender, through the quiet courage of letting life move us forward. What if the very beliefs you were taught to admire, discipline, ambition, control, were also the very chains keeping you from feeling free? From the earliest age, Western culture imprints a silent command: be better, do more, never stop. We're told that rest is laziness, that slowness is weakness, and that discomfort is simply the price of success. And so we chase goals like shadows on a wall, always moving, always grasping, never arriving. We are raised on slogans like no pain, no gain, and you can sleep when you're dead. Productivity becomes a virtue. Haste becomes a habit. And before we even realize it, we're living inside a system that rewards constant output while punishing stillness. But here's the haunting truth. This prison doesn't have bars. It's built from thoughts. We lock ourselves in with stories like, if I don't stay ahead, I'll fall behind, or if I stop now, I'll lose everything I've worked for. Fear wears the mask of ambition. Anxiety dresses up as drive. And soon even our moments of rest are filled with guilt. We begin to live not for the experience of life itself, but for the illusion of progress. We optimize every hour, measure our worth by productivity, and treat life like a project to be managed rather than a mystery to be lived. Alan Watts saw this clearly. He spoke of a Western world that had become neurotic with control, where doing had become more important than being, where logic had silenced intuition, and where even emotions were treated like obstacles to success. In this world, everything, including our relationships, our creativity, and our own inner world, must be efficient, effective, and measurable. But human souls aren't factories, and peace isn't a product. When you live in a system that never allows you to slow down, you begin to forget what presence feels like. You can have a full calendar and still feel empty inside. You can check every box and still lie awake at night wondering, why does none of this feel like enough? The invisible prison isn't made of limits, it's made of expectations. The kind that push you to sacrifice yourself in the name of performance. But the door has always been open. The key is not to push harder, it's to pause, to question. To remember that a meaningful life isn't built by force, but by alignment with your values, your truth, and the rhythm of something far deeper than hustle. Because sometimes the most radical act in a world that never stops is to stop. What if the thing you're searching so hard to find peace, clarity, a sense of purpose can only appear when you finally stop searching? In a culture built on urgency, slowing down feels dangerous. Pausing feels unproductive. But the truth is, speed often becomes a shield one we use to avoid the discomfort of being present with ourselves. And when you never stop, you never notice how far you've drifted from who you really are. To reclaim the natural flow of life is not to abandon your responsibilities or reject ambition. It's to remember that you were never designed to live in a constant state of fight or flight. Your body, your mind, your spirit, they all have rhythms, cycles, seasons. But modern life flattens those rhythms, demanding that you bloom constantly, that you perform endlessly. And so you begin to mistake exhaustion for progress and stillness for failure. But nature doesn't rush, and yet everything gets done. There is wisdom in the pause. There is clarity in the space between actions. There is power in waiting until something feels right, not just looks right on paper. When you begin to reconnect with that rhythm, something begins to shift inside you. You stop measuring your worth by how much you produce. You stop seeking validation through burnout, and you begin to honor your energy, your timing, your truth. This is the heart of Wu Wei, not doing less out of fear or apathy, but doing less from a place of deep presence and conscious choice. It's the art of selecting what truly matters and letting go of what doesn't. It's trusting that you don't have to force outcomes for life to move forward. In fact, life often moves more gracefully when you stop interfering with its natural course. Alan Watts reminded us that winter is just as necessary as spring, that the stillness is not an interruption in the journey, it is part of the journey. When you reclaim the natural flow, you begin to live with a kind of elegance, a quiet confidence, not because everything is perfect, but because you no longer need to force it to be. And maybe for the first time in a long time, you can breathe. Not because the world finally slowed down, but because you did. And in that breath, you remember who you were before the pressure, before the noise, before you forgot how to listen. You were never lost. You were just moving too fast to feel the truth that was always waiting underneath the surface. Now it's time to return. How do you live in flow when the world around you moves at the speed of urgency? How do you embrace ease when everything and everyone seems to reward effort? Wu Wei may sound poetic in theory, but to practice it in today's hyper-connected, hyper-demanding world feels like an act of rebellion. And maybe that's exactly what it is, a conscious, quiet rebellion against the pressure to always be on, always be pushing, always be ahead. But this rebellion doesn't look like giving up. It doesn't mean quitting your job or moving to a mountain cabin. It means shifting the way you engage with life, not from compulsion, but from awareness. It starts with one simple but radical step: slowing down. Before reacting to the next notification, take a breath. Before saying yes to another obligation, pause and ask, is this aligned with who I am? When you move more slowly, you begin to hear the subtle signals inside you, the ones drowned out by noise, urgency, and fear. You begin to act from clarity rather than panic. Wu Wei invites you to choose quality over quantity, depth over speed. It invites you to trust that sometimes the best decision is no decision, at least not right now. That waiting is not weakness, it's wisdom. That resting is not indulgence, it's intelligence. In your daily life, this might look like saying no to an opportunity that doesn't feel right, even if it looks good on the surface. It might mean allowing a conversation to unfold without controlling the outcome. It could be as simple as walking slower, eating mindfully, listening more deeply. Practicing Wu Wei doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing the right thing at the right time, with the right energy, and letting go of what's not yours to carry. It's learning to move with life's current instead of exhausting yourself fighting against it. This takes courage, because the old patterns will whisper, you're falling behind, you're being lazy, everyone else is doing more. But what if doing more isn't the answer? What if being more present is? Alan Watts said that when we stop forcing life, something magical happens. The right doors open, the right paths appear, the right answers rise, not from effort, but from space, from stillness, from trust. So begin today, not by fixing everything, but by listening. Where in your life are you trying too hard? Where might you soften your grip? Where can you allow instead of control? Because Wu Wei isn't just a concept, it's a rhythm. a return to a natural state you've always known, but may have forgotten in the noise. And the more you live from that place, the more life begins to meet you, not with resistance, but with grace. What if the freedom you've been chasing doesn't come from doing more, but from letting go? There comes a moment in every life when the struggle becomes too heavy, when all the effort, all the planning, all the control no longer produce clarity, only exhaustion. You find yourself questioning everything. Why does it still feel like something is missing? Why am I still tired even when I've done everything right? That moment, though painful, is sacred, because it's in that space between breaking and awakening that a new way of being becomes possible. This is the power of conscious surrender. Surrender doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean resigning to fate or abandoning responsibility. True surrender is a deliberate act of clarity. It's the courage to stop resisting what life is already trying to reveal. It's the wisdom to recognize that you are part of something much larger than your plans, your fears, or your timelines. When you consciously surrender, you stop trying to force outcomes. You release the illusion that you can control everything and instead begin to cooperate with life. You move from fear to trust, from tension to openness, from striving to flow, and something remarkable happens. You begin to experience peace, not the superficial peace of empty affirmations or toxic positivity, but a grounded, embodied stillness. A peace that comes from no longer being at war with reality. A peace that doesn't require certainty, only presence. Alan Watts said that transformation doesn't happen when we push for change, but when we stop resisting what already wants to emerge within us. When we stop trying to be someone else, somewhere else living some other life, and simply show up here now. That's the essence of conscious surrender, not escaping life, but entering it fully. Not forcing yourself into the next chapter, but allowing this chapter to unfold. Not grasping for meaning, but realizing that meaning arises when you make space for it. Of course, the mind will fight this. It will whisper doubts, it will crave control, it will panic in the presence of the unknown. But the more you surrender, not out of defeat, but out of devotion, the more you return to your true nature. The one that knows how to breathe, how to trust, how to move in rhythm with the unseen intelligence of life itself. So ask yourself gently, what are you still holding on to that's holding you back? What might open up if you stop trying to force the next step and simply allow the next step to meet you? Because surrender is not the end of your power. It's the beginning of your alignment. It's the doorway to freedom, to flow to a life not dictated by pressure, but led by presence. And perhaps that's what you were looking for all along. Based on the content we've explored, one of the most important lessons is this peace doesn't come from control, it comes from connection. In a culture that praises effort and productivity, we've been taught that the harder we push, the better life will become. But what if that belief is backward? What if constantly trying to fix yourself is exactly what's keeping you from feeling whole? The wisdom of Wu Wei teaches us that ease isn't laziness, it's alignment. You don't have to force clarity, growth, or healing. You simply have to create the space for it. That means slowing down, saying no when your body says no, trusting that life has a rhythm and that you don't have to micromanage it to be okay. Let this be your reminder you're allowed to rest without guilt. You're allowed to pause without falling behind. And you're allowed to live gently in a world that tells you to be hard. Because true strength isn't in how much you can carry, it's in knowing when to let go.